Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this Flinders University Brave mini lecture series event titled Braving COVID, where we will today look at how you can equip yourself to emerge from the pandemic in good shape. I'm Karen Ashford and I'm delighted to be your MC today. Above all else, we'd like to acknowledge that we're hosting this forum on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and we pay our respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We also acknowledge and convey our deep appreciation to the elders of all the nations upon which Flinders operates. Today's event is delivered as part of our Brave lecture series, so named because through this series we showcase our researchers who challenge the status quo and bravely investigate with a view to resolve some of the big societal challenges of our time. This online Brave mini-series aims to instil information and inspiration in rapidly changing and challenging times. A reminder, if you can't stay for the duration of the live stream, you can watch our recording later via our website, flinders.edu.au. As always, we're keen to make this an interactive event with a live Q&A session. It's your chance to participate in the discussion and to pose questions to our speaker, Mike Kyrios, in real time. We do ask, however, that everyone treats this forum as a place of respectful engagement, where people are treated with dignity and where differing views are tolerated. We're ready to start receiving your questions now via the message function on this platform, or you can join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Brave Research. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you today's expert speaker, Professor Mike Kyrios. Professor Kyrios is an internationally recognised clinical psychologist who holds the position of Vice President and Executive Dean of the College of Education, Psychology and Social Work and inaugural Director of the Órama Insitute for Mental Health and Wellbeing. He's joining us from Melbourne, where he's been living through lockdown amongst the many challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic is presenting around the world. Key to this discussion is an exploration of coping, surviving and thriving. With so many of our normal coping mechanisms challenged by the pandemic, what can we do differently to maintain our health and well-being? I'd like to invite Professor Mike Kyrios to deliver today's mini lecture titled Braving COVID, Everything You Wanted to Know About Making It Through a Pandemic but Were Afraid to Ask. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks for the invitation. Hi, everyone. I'm actually, as Karen has indicated, I'm in Melbourne. I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Yalukit Willem people, who've looked after not only the lands, but actually the traditions of their peoples for tens of thousands of years, and I acknowledge their leaders, past, present and emerging, and pay my respects actually to all Indigenous communities and the lands where each of us are currently congregating. So today I'm going to talk to you about some of the research we've been undertaking in partnership with the SAMRI Wellbeing and Resilience Centre on mental health wellbeing of our community, inclusive of actually some of the research that we've been doing with our own students and our staff. So let me see if my, there you go. So here are some of the concepts. Now, mental illness, we all know, we've all heard, 1 in 5 Australians aged between 16 and 85 will experience a mental illness in any 1 year. We know that almost half of those people will experience a mental illness at some point in their lifetime. And we all know that most or, at least half of those people won't access any treatment. And that number is actually quite large when you compare it to people with physical disorders. And I think part of the reason for that is that stigma, poor mental health literacy, poor access, and poor help-seeking behaviours are really major challenges when it comes to mental illness. A lot of us think, though, that mental illness and well-being are opposite ends of the same spectrum. And actually, that's just not true. You can be mentally healthy, but have poor well-being. You can actually have mental health problems, challenges, but actually have a better or a worse sense of well-being. So the way we define good mental health is not just the absence of mental illness, but it's also the presence of mental well-being. So it's a two-dimensional framework that we use. So you can have optimal mental well-being, minimal mental well-being, and then the other dimension is to look at minimum mental illness and maximum mental illness. Now, some of the research that we've been doing shows that, in fact, about 52% of people have what we call complete mental health. So the absence of mental illness and the presence of positive well-being. So these are statistics pre-COVID. In fact, since COVID has begun, we've been undertaking a number of surveys over that time, and actually we have found that only around 1 in 5, so 20% of people now have complete mental health. And this is, of course, really quite challenging for all of us. The mental illness systems, we call them mental health systems, but in fact our mental health system really only looks after people with mental illness, or who at least have got very severe symptoms. And that accounts for about 20% of people, as we said before, some of whom actually have high levels of well-being, interestingly enough. And the ones that do have high levels of well-being are the ones that are really well connected to the communities and to the people around them. But in fact, the great majority of people with mental illness have poor well-being. But there is a group of people with low levels of well-being, some of whom are troubled, but actually a lot of whom are vulnerable to the development of mental illness or mental disorders, if you like. And it's that group that we're particularly interested in, because at times like this, it's that group with low levels of well-being, low levels of resilience. This is the group that sometimes is really challenged by very stressful periods. Now, what is well-being? Well, there's a whole heap of theories, as you can imagine. Philosophers, psychologists, sociologists, everyone's got an opinion about this sort of thing. But about 80% of the theories actually share the kinds of notions that are associated with positive well-being. It's about being satisfied with your life, having a nice balance between positive and negative emotions. It's about being engaged, about being able to achieve and having meaning and purpose in your life, and of course, positive relationships. And positive relationships really are one of the main issues that kind of joins all of these theories. Of course, there are other aspects of it. So people who feel that they have self-agency, who can kind of accept their situation and can grow personally through their challenges, and who can kind of adapt to environmental changes and have a sense of autonomy at the same time as being able to connect with other people. These are the people that have good mental well-being, and therefore, as a result of that, are actually less prone to developing mental disorders. So people with high emotional well-being and good mental health are at lower risk of physical and mental illnesses. They use hospitals far less frequently. They recover faster from surgery and illnesses. They have improved management of their chronic illnesses. So a lot of people with diabetes, for instance, or heart disease, or other kinds of inflammatory diseases, or they actually manage their physical disorders much better. They have an improved quality of life. They have more positive relationships and a better social life, as you'd expect. But actually in the workplace, they have greater productivity. And as far as our students are concerned, they actually achieve far better outcomes. And again, going back to the workplace, people with high levels of well-being have decreased absenteeism and decreased personal insurance claims. So when we measure these things, when we do our surveys, actually we want to measure not just well-being and resilience, but we actually also want to measure the disability. But a lot of the surveys actually only measure the disability, the distress, the symptoms. So we like to think that we can capture, if you like, the positive and more adaptive aspects of mental health. So with the SAMRI group, we've got a tracker, what we're calling it the Be Well tracker, and we measure mental well-being, resilience, stress, mood problems, feelings of anxiety, and of course physical health. And we've been capturing all of these for many months pre-COVID. Actually, we started doing this this work last year. So we now are in the unique position of being able to compare different data sets. So let me just show you what we found amongst our students over the past, over this year. And this is over 4 colleges. So the great majority of students have participated in, or have been able to participate in this survey. What we know is that in 2020, and particularly more recently, the colleges had worse outcomes than 2019. So COVID has really impacted on students in terms of their mood, in terms of their anxiety, in terms of their stress. We also know that when you look at those that are doing well versus those not doing well, 64% of our students were not doing well with respect to anxiety. That's this year. And when we compare that to last year, it was only 25% that weren't doing well with respect to anxiety. So you can see that there's been a huge increase in mental distress. If you look at stress as well, again, you get a very similar kind of a pattern, and the same goes with mood. When it comes to well-being and resilience, what you'll find is that 50% of our students were very low in their sense of well-being this year, compared to earlier in the year or even last year, where around 23 to 26% of students were not particularly doing well in terms of their well-being. This is really concerning, and in fact, if you look at that in a little bit more detail, 16% of our students were actually languishing with respect to well-being, and this is of great concern. In terms of the number of students that were flourishing, only 23% were flourishing. And again, physical activity, nutrition, sleep, all of these kinds of factors, again, we see worse outcomes during COVID. Many people have been asking us about the kind of plight of the international students. Interestingly enough, we did not find necessarily that international students were doing less well than our domestic students. And I think part of the reason for that is actually they're kind of connected to each other. They're connected to their cultural groups, and so they feel that sense of support, whereas a lot of our domestic students, particularly those from rural, remote areas, they feel a little bit disconnected, and particularly in Melbourne, for instance, when students couldn't visit their families in the rural areas because of the lockdown, those students really did suffer quite a bit. Now, we not only have this data on students, but of course we have this data on the general population. But what you'll see is actually students are doing way worse than the general population across well-being, depression and anxiety consistently, whether it was in 2019, whether it was at the start of 2020, or whether it was more recently in 2020. Now, we've also measured this community well-being over time, and what we found is that only 21% of our community respondents during COVID displayed good mental health, compared to 42 or 50% in other surveys that we've done. So again, this is quite concerning. Now, when we look at this over time, what you'll see is that well-being, depression and anxiety did wax and wane. And as I say, we're measuring this on an ongoing basis. It had its peak in March or May. Then there was a slow recovery to baseline in June of this year, but increased again with the second wave in Victoria. It started to sort of return to baseline again in August, but it's actually been dipping again more recently. Now, I don't have data from last week's events for South Australia, but my predictions are it just plummeted. And I'll show you some hot off the press results that we do have. And this is a survey that we did during Mental Health Week. And what we found was that people were not doing well during Mental Health Week in terms of their well-being relative to COVID. They were not doing well with respect to anxiety relative to COVID. Depression wasn't quite so bad during Mental Health Week, but anxiety was definitely up. Now, what are the sort of specific problems that people are telling us about? By the way, we've done this survey amongst staff, but I actually don't have that data because it's an ongoing project at the moment, and I'd love to be able to report those results as soon as they are available. But the sorts of problems people, adults, complain about, particularly during COVID, are fatigue. People are constantly tired, and a lot of this is due to sleep problems. A lot of this is due to being online 24/7. You really get that sense of being immersed or you know, in work and not being able to sort of switch off. People are at home and they're multitasking, and this is particularly challenging, I think, for female staff members or female members of the community, and quite often there's a fair bit of conflict. If you're in the home 24/7 with people, with children, it can be quite disconcerting. If you're at home with people that you live with, and because you're not living in a family situation, again, people can get on your nerves, particularly if things are really stressful at work. And we all know that workloads skyrocketed this year because we had to respond very quickly to some of the challenges that we had, particularly within the university sector. There's also an increase in alcohol consumption, and this has been shown over and over and over again. And of course, conflict, alcohol consumption, it's the perfect storm for increases in domestic violence, and actually separations have become a real issue during this time. So they're the kind of more severe end of the spectrum, but in fact, part of the problem is also that people are not exercising, people's health behaviours have deteriorated, those with chronic illnesses have not followed up with their doctor, even though telehealth services are available. And I've just seen some data around people who suffer from diabetes, for instance, and this has been a real issue where, blood glucose control has actually become quite variable. There are a whole range of other issues that people report, and some of these kind of lead to the psychological distress and the psychological challenges that we've seen. People's tolerance for uncertainty will vary, right? Some of us are better at it than others. Some cultures are better at it than others. But in a situation like this, frustration and anger absolutely rise. And of course, if you have a higher level of intolerance for uncertainty, your frustration is going to rise quicker and to a greater level, to a greater extent. Fears and worries. People have multiple fears and worries. At the beginning of COVID, we didn't know what was going to happen. The second wave comes along in South Australia and we think, oh my God, it's going to be the same as Victoria. They went through a really bad stretch. If you're vulnerable in any way because of age, because of health status, then of course you have increased fears because what if I catch it? And people then have a fear of others. I know I suffer from hay fever quite a bit, and God bless Adelaide, well known for its pollen. I walk into supermarkets where there's dust or whatever, and I start to sneeze, and people will immediately turn around, and I feel a little bit like a leper, even though I may have been tested and I know I don't have COVID. So this fear of others is actually also palpable, and again, I think some people respond to that quite strongly. Panic. We've seen the panic buying, and again, I think the underlying aspect of this is about fear of the unknown. I need to get food, I need to get toilet paper, I need to get disinfectant, I need to get these things because what if ... On the positive side, people have really, I think, moved together and have found a sense of purpose, a sense of community. I love watching neighbours look out for each other. I love watching people reach out to the elderly or to people who are challenged in some kind of a way. A lot of the elderly, for instance, that live up in the hills, there's, public transport is difficult for them. And it's fantastic to hear these stories of neighbours coming together to help people out. Because, it's about finding purpose through our connection to other people, not just for ourselves. And I think this positive channeling of this need to be a human, and I know at Flinders we had the Be a Better Human campaign for students, and in fact I'm seeing this consistently in communities, and this is a thing that we can all do to help ourselves, but not just ourselves, but actually everyone else. Doing things for other people gives you a sense of control. Now, amongst us, there is a need for control and a sense of control, right? Now, some of us have a greater or lesser need for control, and this is somewhat personality based, but it can be mediated by improving our sense of control. And there's a lot that can be done to improve our sense of control. And this includes our emotional control. We can catch it early, and we need to catch it early, because if we don't, there'll be a domino effect. But there's things that we can do. I gave some examples before about, random acts of kindness for others. That's one thing that you can do to maintain a sense of control. The other thing we need to consider is the time factor. So most people do okay for 0 to 2 weeks of lockdown or working from home. At about 2 to 4 weeks, people are really beginning to get antsy, and by anything beyond 4 weeks is quite problematic. So you can imagine what happened here in Victoria, where they had, well and truly over 100 days of lockdown. People started to get antsy. You saw people rebelling. You see aggression and frustration increasing, and this is a real issue. Now, I think if we start introducing some coping strategies very early on in the piece, then of course there's much that can be achieved within the 2 weeks that can then follow up in the 4 weeks, and then can follow up beyond those 4 weeks. Now, for all of us are either leaders or influencers to some extent. We need to model appropriate behaviours to our teams, to our colleagues, to our friends, to our families. Reach out and check in. If we're all in lockdown, or if we're all working from home, reach out and check in. This gives you a sense of purpose and a sense of control. But a lot of us take the sense of control to the next step, and often it's inappropriate. What we do is we jump in and we offer solutions. What's important is that we actually listen. Everyone we know has a personal situation that makes them unique. We all have a personal situation that makes us unique. It might be our family circumstances, it might be personal pressures, it might be our health vulnerabilities, it might be that we have contacts with elderly people, it might be that we're actually feeling lonely. You can be in a household full of people and still feel lonely because you don't have your peers there. So I think it's important to listen to people and not jump to solutions. People who are in distress tend to lose confidence, and what they don't need to do is be made to feel that they actually are out of control and they are powerless. I think it's important to listen to them and acknowledge that what they're experiencing, what they're reporting to you, is spot on, that you can relate to it, that it is what many people are going through. Focus on the positives. And if there are enough there, I would say that is sufficient. If they are doing the right sorts of things, like checking in with others, doing a bit of exercise, taking time out, and we'll talk about these things soon, then that should be sufficient. And what we need to do is to be kind and nurturing. This will increase long-term motivation and productivity. Whereas if we're telling people that, no, you're doing it all wrong, you should do this, you should do that, and you should do this, that, and the other, shoulds are an absolutely first-rate way of undermining people's confidence and undermining people's motivation. Now, of course, if people are in clear distress, go and consult with a Dean PNR, with PNC, and consider some other options like the Employee Assistance Program, the Be Well plan that I'll talk to you about soon. And if you're going to give advice, you have to own it. You have to own it and model it. So one of the things I would say to people is, I've been experiencing A, B, C, and D, and this is what I've done. And I found that some of it helped, some of it didn't. You know, there are individual differences. You know, maybe you could try some of these things and I'll check in on you later. As distinct from do this, do this, do that. So the kinds of things that you can do, we use an acronym. We use the STREAM framework, and you know there's a URL there. If you go to the Órama Insitute of Mental Health and Wellbeing website, you'll see the STREAM framework. And what we do with the STREAM framework is that, so every one of these letters has some kind of meaning. So S is for social networking. I've kind of talked about reaching out, checking in, catching up with friends, Facebook, FaceTime, do whatever you can to check in on people, to reach out to people. I love little texts. I send little texts to people. The thing that we've been doing a lot of in my little circle is sending little memes to each other. It might be about the American election. It might be something funny about what's happening in Canberra, or about border closures. You know, having a kind of a positive, humorous element to it is really useful. But that's all about connecting to other people. T is for time out. Clearly, if we're all in the room or in the house, we need time out. And sometimes it's quite useful to go into a room, lock yourself away, watch the latest episode of The Crown, whatever it is, read a book, but take some time out for yourself. I think it's imperative also that you take time out from your Teams and Zoom meetings. Make sure your Zoom meetings finish 10 to 15 minutes before they were meant to. Go for a little bit of a walk around, get up off your backside, stand up, do some stretching, whatever. This brings us to R. R is for relaxation. Now, of course, relaxation can take many forms. It could be watching television, it could be reading a book, it could be all sorts of things. But in fact, there are relaxation and yoga exercises that you can access from YouTube. Just get onto YouTube and people will take you through these. They will also take you through mindfulness exercises. These are fantastic exercises for getting yourself out of your headspace. E is for exercise. Again, my wife and I would do YouTube exercises. Sometimes they were the 7-minute ones, sometimes they were the 10-minute ones. We'd do them together when we were in isolation in our place in Adelaide. We don't have a yard, we don't have a backyard, but we had this little area in the front of the house, sort of a porch, and the sun would sometimes, you know, hit it. So we'd get out there and we'd exercise following the YouTubes, and we do it together as well. Fantastic way of just burning off some energy, keeping fit, and for people who've got chronic illnesses, it's a great way of maintaining your health behaviours. A is for alternative thinking, and you know, there are great ways of thinking things through so that they don't seem to be bigger than they necessarily need to be. All right, mindfulness will help you get out of your head, but actually, you know, thinking about the greater good, thinking about the short term, cutting things into short time frames. You can't think about being locked down for 6 months. Think about what you're going to do today. Cut it up into small pieces. Try and find positives in the situation. Try and find some humor in the situation, and try and connect to people who can help you think things through. What we need to do when it comes to our negative thoughts is disassociate from, take a step back and think things through logically. Don't get caught up in the moment, particularly if the moment is a negative thought and a negative emotion. M is for being mindful of others and being mindful of the positives. Random acts of kindness. This is not just about us, but what's interesting is by being mindful of others, we actually end up helping ourselves find a purpose. And then that connection to others will take us to another place, a much more positive place. Now, we've developed a whole program around these sorts of strategies. It's called the Be Well Plan, bewellplan.com. Since the second wave in Adelaide, we've put it back online for free. This is the non-facilitated version. The videos are up there, but we also have facilitated versions of this. And what I mean by facilitated is we have 2 group leaders who take people through Zoom or Teams through the 5 sessions that we have. We're rolling this out through our students, and now we're rolling it out through some of the staff members as well within Flinders. So look out for that, and we're hoping to extend that through the university-wide wellbeing framework that we are developing. We actually did some work. We did what's called a sort of a systematic review, and we looked at 419 studies, 53,000 participants, and we found identified which strategies work best in facilitating good mental health and positive well-being. There are some of them there: mindfulness, cognitive behavior therapy, yoga, writing about your experiences, being compassionate, positive relationships, exercise. Actually, what's interesting is, and I know it was a bit hard to do when Adelaide had the very hard lockdown. At least in Melbourne, we could go out for a walk. But what's fantastic is going out to a natural environment, be it a park, be it a river, be it a beach. And if you can't do that, as I say, go to YouTube and exercise with natural environments in the background. Be Well Plan is 5 sessions. It takes you through a whole range of strategies, and you get to choose which strategies work for you. It's a very individualized program. And what's very interesting is, we've been doing some evaluations, and what is absolutely fantastic is that positive mental health outcomes improved and psychological distress decreased in 5 short sessions. And these were significant decreases. In fact, 76% of participants demonstrated meaningful improvements. And what was interesting is that those that had pre-existing high levels of distress actually did better. So don't think that, oh, I'm already too anxious, this won't work for me, because it just might. But don't forget, you can always access a mental health plan through your general practitioner or through the EAP programs that we have. There are other kind of wellbeing resources that you can access through P&C. So as a summary, there are challenges to mental health and wellbeing, and these have increased during this COVID pandemic. We should make a distinction between mental illness and mental health, or mental distress and mental well-being. And there are lots of things that are associated with well-being, and if we all did those, they would build up our resilience so that we were then more resilient to the development of mental illness or mental distress. And that there are these psychological strategies or these interventions. Sometimes it's the STREAM framework that you can make up yourself, or sometimes it's planned, focused, systematic interventions like Be Well Plan. And these can improve well-being, resilience, help you avoid the development of disorder, and actually help you manage disorder. So on that positive last statement, let's do some Q&A.
Fantastic. Look, thank you, Mike, for that deep dive into wellbeing. We are starting to get some questions from the audience, and I'll remind people, don't hesitate to send yours through as well. We'll do our best to answer everybody if we can get to you, but these sessions are intended to be snackable, so we may not be able to get to absolutely everybody in time, and if we can't, we'll post answers on the web page, and if you'd like a direct response, please leave your contact details. So to get the discussion started, Mike, can we have a look at one of the big issues that many people are facing right now, working from home?
Yeah.
How to balance work demands with the many things happening at home, particularly when we don't have the normal boundaries of the office to help us contain the normal operating spaces and the normal mental spaces. So what are some of the challenges, and how can we turn that around and thrive in that situation?
It is an absolute issue. Look, I face this every day. I've been in lockdown for I don't know how long. It's only recently we've been allowed to go out here in Melbourne, and I'm still stuck behind the border closures. So I think everyone's facing this. At first step is we have to take personal responsibility for that. Part of the problem is that we are all, and it's not a problem, it's a great thing for an organisation. We are loyal to our organisation. We want to do the right thing by our colleagues who are actually our friends. We want to do the right thing. But at some point, there is a line when you go, I'm not sleeping. I'm feeling really tired and fatigued. I'm actually not at my peak. I'm not sparking. I've got to take some time out. I've got to take responsibility to take the time out, to put the line in the sand, to have a discussion with my partner, with the people around me, to say, do you think I've been overdoing this? And ask yourself, how much time do you actually take out during the day for yourself? Because if you're not taking out an hour or two, and there are individual differences, right? We have different responsibilities. We have different peaks of work that we have to, get through. So these are questions that only each individual can answer. But, check in with your supervisor, say, look, this is happening with me. I'm just, I just don't know where the line is. Can we have a discussion about this? Because I'm actually doing too much and I'm not looking after not only me, but the people around me, because all of us have responsibilities to our kids, to our friends, to our partners, to our neighbours. This is what makes a complete human being. It's not just someone who just works. Now, you can maintain very high levels of intensity for a few weeks, right? We all do it. Writing a grant, putting in a tender, closing down the university, opening up the university. Like, we've all been there, right? Putting things online, but at some point you've got to say, deep breath, go for a walk, do some exercise, do some relaxation, and take some time out for yourself. There is a balance between pleasurable activities and activities of mastery, and you've got to get that right, because it's not sustainable. The more you go, the more likely you're going to fall, and the more likely you're going to fall hard. You have to take responsibility for it and check it out with others.
We have a question here from an anonymous scribe. Do you think that this period of COVID could build resilience in individuals in the longer term, or possibly only build resilience in those with higher well-being to begin with? So if you've already got it, will you build on it, or can you build on it even if you're in deficit?
Look, that's a great question, and it's one that we asked ourselves. But our evaluation outcome study shows that actually you can build resilience, and it's people who've got higher levels of distress that actually did better. So we now have evidence that you can build it. But it's also a sort of a mind frame. Challenging situations are actually opportunities. They're opportunities for change. Our brains are kind of pretty lazy, can I just say this? We get into habits and we just keep those habits. And that's just the way that we're wired. And it's not a personal failing, it's the way humans are wired. So what you need to do is think of the distress or the stress as an opportunity, a message from your body to say, stop, think this through, because this is now an opportunity to start establishing different habits. All right, now there's some literature that says that if you try something 30 times, then you've got it down pat. I'm actually more optimistic about that, because if you do it 10 times and make sure that everyone around you reinforces what you're doing, then you're well on your way to actually establishing a new habit, whether it's exercising, whether it's eating properly, whether it's not drinking too much, whether it's reaching out to other people.
We have a question from Jeremy. Hi, Mike. In my PhD research, I'm looking at young people, mental health and unemployment/precarious employment. Do you think this group will be doing even worse than students? Good question.
It's a really good question. Look, what I can, just talking about students. So we know that students with high wellbeing actually have better employability outcomes and can take that resilience from the university into their civilian life, if you like, right? So it is important to develop that in students now, but it's not just students who are worrying about their employment, opportunities. It's actually people who are already in employment, and the university sector is already under pressure. We are very lucky at Flinders, right? We are quite, relative to other universities, we've done fantastically, right? But across the university sector, across the hospitality sector, across the travel sector, there are many sectors where people are really staring unemployment or employment minimisation squarely in the face. And I think it's now time to rethink. If you're in that situation, it's time to rethink your options. This is the best time to go back to university and try and upskill. It's the best time to think about, if you've sort of been a little bit unhappy in your career, or this particular sector of industry is really not going anywhere, perhaps it's time to retrain and go somewhere else. Now, that takes agency, it takes optimism, it takes some energy, and it takes permission. You have the right to give yourself permission to change your situation and to put your plan up and carry it through. That positivity will get you through. That's what resilience is, actually. Now people say you have resilience, therefore you do these things. Whereas I would say if you do these things, you then by definition have developed resilience. You may not feel that, but that is resilience. So how you feel on the inside sometimes is something that we kind of need to disconnect from. Think it through logically, think it through rationally, come up with a plan, put that plan in place, and then reassess things when you're on the other side, because at that point you go, I did that, get out of here.
We have just a couple of minutes left, so I think we've got time for one more question. We do have some others which we will post online in response after this session. So I know we're not going to be able to get to everybody, but we will come back to everyone online with an answer. This question is from Tracy. Balancing COVID safety and mental health benefits of outdoor exercise, would you advise the state government in the next lockdown to not knock out exercise, maybe more of a Melbourne-style lockdown?
Yes, I would. But, again, we've got to balance that out against the actual health risks. Now, I'm in no position to talk about the health risks, but absolutely, I think, and Melbourne showed that it was possible to do it. But there's likely to be costs. Wearing a mask, right? So can I tell you, I went for a walk yesterday for the first time in, I think, 3-4 months without a mask. And it was like heaven, right? And wearing a mask was really frustrating, but it's a cost that that Melburnians were willing to bear, or don't know about willing, but bear, in order to be able to go walking outside. And I do think that that's really, really important, because exercise is a way of improving well-being. It's a way of controlling anxiety and stress. So I would absolutely give that recommendation to government, but we would need to make sure that that was balanced against the health risks.
Look, we have reached time, so we will answer the rest of the questions on our Brave webpage. I would like to thank you, our audience, for your participation, and I'd like to particularly thank Professor Mike Kyrios for his expert insights here today. Remember, you can watch this session again on Flinders YouTube channel or Flinders University's Brave webpage, where you can also register to receive notifications of future events. Thanks once again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.